Ma'am, keep your hands where I can see them. The command cracked through the warm afternoon air so sharply that even the traffic seemed to hesitate for half a second. Avery Monroe stopped walking just outside the polished glass doors of Brighton Jewelers, a slim black shopping bag hanging loosely from one hand while sunlight flashed across the chrome trim of parked SUVs lined along Madison Avenue. Around her, conversation slowed. A woman near the valet stand lowered her iced coffee. A man in a navy business suit paused mid-step with his phone still pressed to his ear. Somewhere farther down the block, a siren wailed briefly before fading into the heartbeat of the city. Avery turned slowly toward the voice. Officer Ethan Blake stood beside a patrol car with one hand resting near his belt, mirrored sunglasses reflecting the crowd gathering by the curb. His partner hovered a few feet behind him, younger, nervous, scanning the scene with quick, uncertain eyes. "Is there a problem, officer?" Avery asked calmly. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't shake. That bothered Ethan more than he expected. Most people got defensive fast. Some panicked. Some started explaining before he even asked a question. But this woman just stood there beneath the hard white daylight in a charcoal blazer and dark slacks, composed enough to make him feel like he was the one being examined. "We received a report about a stolen bracelet," Ethan said. "The description matches you." A sharp voice cut through the crowd before Avery could answer. "That's her." The woman pushing through the spectators wore oversized designer sunglasses and a cream-colored dress that looked too expensive for the middle of the afternoon. Her perfume reached the sidewalk before she did. "I saw her near the display counter," she said quickly, pointing one manicured finger toward Avery. "Then my bracelet disappeared." Murmurs rolled through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Avery glanced once at the woman, then at the storefront windows reflecting everything happening on the sidewalk. Cameras above the entrance, another above the crosswalk. Ethan noticed her eyes moving and interpreted it instantly. "Looking for exits." "Set the bag down slowly," he ordered. A delivery truck rumbled past the intersection, shaking the pavement beneath their feet. Avery obeyed without argument, placing the small bag carefully beside her heels. The movement exposed the silver watch on her wrist, simple but precise, catching a stripe of sunlight across the glass. Ethan stepped closer. "What's in the bag?" "A notebook," Avery replied. "And coffee. Mind if we check?" She looked at him directly for the first time. Calm brown eyes. Steady. Observant. Not angry. Somehow that made the tension worse. "Do I have a choice?" she asked softly. Ethan felt several people nearby watching him now, waiting to see how he handled it. Public pressure always changed things, especially on a crowded Manhattan sidewalk where every third person had a phone aimed at the scene. The younger officer shifted awkwardly beside the patrol car. "Maybe we should just ask the store to verify first," he muttered under his breath. Ethan ignored him. "Ma'am, if you cooperate, this'll go a lot faster." Avery nodded once. That's usually what people say right before they humiliate someone in public. The sentence landed harder than Ethan expected. A brief silence opened between them. Heat shimmered above the asphalt. Somewhere behind the crowd, a bicycle courier cursed at a taxi blocking the lane. The city kept moving while the moment itself seemed frozen under the noon sun. Ethan removed his sunglasses slowly. "Are you refusing a search?" Avery lowered her gaze briefly toward the shopping bag. "No," she said. "I'm wondering why no one's questioned her timeline yet." She nodded slightly toward the woman accusing her. The woman stiffened instantly. "Excuse me." Avery continued calmly. "You said you noticed your bracelet missing after I walked away from the counter." "That's right." "Interesting." Ethan frowned. "What's interesting?" Avery tilted her head slightly toward the jewelry store window. "Because the security reflection behind you shows she never entered the left showroom at all." The woman's expression flickered. Tiny. Fast. But enough. Ethan turned instinctively toward the mirrored glass behind him. The younger officer squinted too, uncertain now. Avery didn't move, didn't press, didn't smirk. She simply stood there while the crowd grew quieter around them. The woman crossed her arms defensively. "I don't know what game you're trying to play." "Neither do I," Avery said. "But someone's definitely in a hurry." Ethan studied her carefully now. Her posture remained relaxed despite two officers surrounding her in broad daylight. No trembling hands. No scattered explanations. No emotional spiral. Just observation. Calculation. Awareness. like she was cataloging everything around her one detail at a time. His radio crackled sharply against his shoulder. Unit 12, status update? Ethan pressed the button without taking his eyes off Avery. Possible theft suspect detained outside Brighton Jewelers. Investigating now. The word detained made several people in the crowd whisper again. Avery's jaw tightened almost invisibly at the sound. Ethan noticed it. For the first time, something human slipped through her composure. Not fear. Fatigue. The kind that came from hearing the same assumption too many times. A little boy standing beside his mother stared at Avery silently from behind the crowd barrier. Maybe 8 years old. Black kid. School backpack hanging from one shoulder. His expression wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. Like he already understood exactly how moments like this usually ended. Avery saw him too. Her face softened for only a second before the mask returned. Ethan stepped forward again. I'm going to ask one more time. Do you consent to a search? Sunlight burned across the windshield of the patrol car behind him, throwing white glare across the sidewalk. Avery inhaled slowly. Then she looked directly at Ethan Blake and said quietly, Officer, before you decide what kind of person I am, you might want to ask yourself why the only calm person here is the one being accused. The crowd did not move after Avery spoke. If anything, people leaned closer. Phones hovered higher above shoulders now. Tiny black mirrors pointed toward the sidewalk like a wall of silent witnesses. Officer Ethan Blake stared at her for another second, trying to decide whether her calmness was confidence or manipulation. The afternoon sun reflected across the jewelry store windows hard enough to make everyone squint, but Avery never blinked. The woman accusing her adjusted her sunglasses with trembling fingers. This is ridiculous, she snapped. Why are we even listening to her? Avery answered before Ethan could speak. Because innocent people usually notice details. A taxi rolled past the curb spraying heat and exhaust into the air. Somewhere nearby, a jackhammer hammered against concrete in short, violent bursts before stopping again. Manhattan noise. Restless. Constant. But around the officers, a strange pocket of silence had formed. Ethan crouched slowly beside Avery's shopping bag. Open it, he said. Avery nodded once and reached carefully for the zipper. The younger officer beside him shifted uneasily. Easy, he muttered. Avery glanced up briefly. I am being easy. She opened the bag slowly. Inside sat a leather notebook, a slim silver laptop, and a coffee cup with condensation still sliding down the side. Nothing else. Ethan searched the contents carefully anyway. Receipts. Pens. A charger cable wrapped neatly beside the notebook. No bracelet. No jewelry box. Nothing stolen. The crowd murmured again. The accusing woman folded her arms tighter across her chest. She could have ditched it already. Ethan stood again, jaw tight. He hated when situations started slipping away from him in public, especially with cameras recording every second. Avery reached into her blazer pocket slowly and removed a folded receipt. I was inside for 4 minutes and 12 seconds, she said calmly. Coffee kiosk first, then check out. Ethan took the receipt reluctantly. The timestamp matched. You memorized the exact time? He asked. I pay attention. Her answer came too quickly, too naturally. Ethan studied her again. There was something controlled about the way she spoke, like every sentence had already been measured before it left her mouth. The younger officer leaned closer to Ethan. Maybe we should pull the store footage before we escalate this. Ethan exhaled through his nose. He hated the word escalate. It implied something was already wrong. The woman suddenly pointed toward Avery again. She touched the counter near me. I know what I saw. Avery tilted her head slightly. No, she said quietly. You know what you expected to see. The sentence hit harder than yelling would have. The woman's face tightened instantly. A few people in the crowd exchanged uncomfortable looks. Ethan felt it too, that shift in atmosphere when a situation stopped feeling routine and started feeling personal. Sweat gathered beneath the collar of his uniform despite the breeze moving through the avenue. Avery bent slightly and picked up her coffee cup. Ethan noticed then that her hands were steady. Not perfectly steady, trained steady, like someone who had learned long ago how to remain calm while everyone else lost control. She took one small sip before speaking again. Did the store manager confirm the bracelet was even missing? The woman hesitated. Tiny, barely noticeable, but Ethan caught it. Well, not officially yet. Interesting, Avery said softly. Ethan frowned. What is that supposed to mean? Avery looked toward the storefront again, where employees inside had started gathering nervously near the entrance. It means everyone here decided I was guilty before anyone confirmed a crime happened. Nobody answered her. The city noise returned suddenly all at once. A horn blared somewhere down the block. A bus hissed at the curb, releasing passengers into the sunlight. Ethan felt dozens of eyes on him now. Waiting. Judging. He hated that feeling more than anything. The younger officer cleared his throat awkwardly. Dispatch just said the manager is reviewing footage. Ethan nodded without looking away from Avery. Good. Avery studied him carefully now, almost sympathetically, which irritated him even more. You really believe instinct makes you objective, she said. Ethan folded his arms. And you think you know me already? No, Avery replied calmly. I think you decided who I was the second you saw me standing outside a luxury store holding a shopping bag. A long silence followed. Ethan wanted to deny it immediately, but something about the certainty in her voice stopped him. Behind Avery, the little boy from earlier still stood beside his mother watching everything unfold. Avery glanced at him briefly again. Ethan noticed this time that the boy looked nervous every time Ethan moved closer to her. That realization sat badly in his stomach for reasons he could not explain. Then the jewelry store doors burst open. A store manager hurried outside carrying a tablet in both hands, his tie crooked and face pale beneath the afternoon light. Officers, he called breathlessly. There is something you need to see. The crowd shifted instantly toward him. Ethan stepped forward while the manager unlocked the tablet with shaking fingers. Avery remained exactly where she was near the curb, sunlight stretching across the side of her face, while traffic rolled endlessly behind her. The manager swallowed hard before turning the screen toward Ethan. Sir, he said quietly. The bracelet never left the display case. Ethan's expression froze. Around them, the crowd went silent again. Completely silent this time. Even the woman in the cream-colored dress stopped breathing for a second. Avery lowered her coffee cup slowly and said in a voice barely above a whisper, Now we can finally talk about why she wanted this scene to happen so badly. The words settled over the sidewalk like cold rain. The bracelet never left the display case. For a moment, nobody moved. The crowd stood frozen beneath the bright Manhattan sun, while reflections from passing cars flickered across the jewelry store windows in restless waves of silver light. Officer Ethan Blake stared at the tablet in the manager's hands, jaw tight enough to ache. The surveillance footage replayed silently on the screen. The woman in the cream-colored dress could be seen stepping away from the display on her own, clutching her purse tightly before turning toward the exit. Avery Monroe never touched the bracelet counter once. Not even accidentally. Ethan felt heat creep up the back of his neck. Around him, the mood had shifted completely. Minutes ago, the crowd had looked at Avery with suspicion. Now they looked at him. At the woman. At the entire scene unfolding on the sidewalk like something ugly nobody wanted to admit they had participated in. There has to be another angle, the woman said suddenly. Her voice cracked this time. Maybe she handed it off to someone. Avery gave a faint nod like she had expected the reaction. There it is, she said quietly. Ethan frowned. There what is? Avery looked directly at the woman. Panic. The woman's sunglasses slipped slightly as she stepped backward. I am not panicking. Actually, Avery replied calmly. Your pulse says otherwise. Ethan blinked. What? Avery gestured lightly toward the woman's throat where a rapid heartbeat fluttered visibly beneath her skin. Fast breathing. Dry swallowing. Defensive posture. She stopped accusing me the second the footage came out. The younger officer beside Ethan shifted uncomfortably. She is kind of right. Ethan shot him a look, but the damage was already done. Several people in the crowd started murmuring again. Only this time the whispers carried a different tone. Suspicion had changed direction. The woman folded her arms tightly. This is insane. Avery picked up her coffee again and took another measured sip before answering. No. What is insane is trying to frame someone in broad daylight outside a building covered in security cameras. The store manager rubbed sweat from his forehead with a trembling handkerchief. Ma'am, he said carefully to the woman. If the bracelet was not stolen, perhaps there has been some misunderstanding. You think I made this up? She snapped. Avery's eyes narrowed slightly for the first time since the encounter began. Not angry. Focused. Like a detective finally reaching the part of a puzzle she recognized. I think you needed a distraction, she said softly. A black SUV rolled slowly through the intersection nearby, sunlight flashing across its dark windows. Avery watched it briefly before returning her attention to the woman. Ethan noticed the movement immediately. Again, that scanning behavior. Calculated. Intentional. His instincts stirred uneasily now, but not in the same way as before. "What distraction?" he asked. Avery looked at him without hesitation. The kind that keeps law enforcement attention fixed in one direction while something else happens somewhere. Nearby, the younger officer's expression changed instantly. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "You are saying this was coordinated?" Avery shrugged lightly. "I am saying false accusations are rarely random." The woman laughed suddenly, but the sound came out strained and hollow. "Listen to her. She sounds paranoid." Avery tilted her head slightly. "And yet you are still here." Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. The woman glanced toward the avenue again. Too fast. Too often. Avery caught it immediately. Ethan did too this time. A dark SUV sat parked half a block away near a fire hydrant. Engine running. Windows tinted. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Do you know the driver of that vehicle?" The woman froze for half a second before recovering. "I have no idea what you were talking about." Avery lowered her voice. "You looked at it 3 times in under a minute." The crowd turned subtly toward the SUV now. A few phones followed. The driver remained motionless behind the windshield. Ethan reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Dispatch, run the plate on a black SUV parked eastbound near 47th and Madison." The woman's composure cracked visibly then. Her hand tightened around her purse strap hard enough for her knuckles to pale beneath the sunlight. Avery watched her carefully. "There it is again," she murmured. Ethan looked at Avery now with entirely different eyes. The calmness, the observation skills, the way she noticed behavioral shifts before anyone else. This was not normal civilian awareness. The younger officer leaned closer to Ethan again. "Who is she?" he whispered. Ethan did not answer because he no longer knew. A gust of warm wind swept along the avenue, carrying the smell of hot concrete and street cart pretzels through the crowd. Avery adjusted the sleeve of her blazer slightly. Ethan noticed then a faint outline beneath the fabric near her wrist. Not jewelry. Not a weapon. Something rectangular clipped inside. Professional. His radio crackled sharply. "Unit 12, vehicle registered to a Shell Corporation under active federal review." Ethan's heartbeat stumbled. Federal review? Avery looked away toward the SUV again, her expression unreadable. Now, the driver inside the vehicle suddenly started the engine harder. Tires rolled slowly against the curb. Ethan stepped toward the street instinctively. "Hold on." But Avery spoke before he could move farther. "Officer Blake." Her voice cut through the noise cleanly enough to stop him in place. Ethan turned back toward her. For the first time since the encounter began, her calmness carried authority instead of restraint. "Do not approach that vehicle alone," she said quietly. The words hit him harder than shouting would have, because suddenly he realized something deeply unsettling. Avery Monroe had not spent the last 20 minutes trying to protect herself from embarrassment. She had been trying to stop everyone else from walking blindly into something far bigger than a stolen bracelet. The SUV began rolling away from the curb so smoothly it almost looked casual, but every instinct in Officer Ethan Blake's body tightened at once. Afternoon sunlight flashed across the windshield as the vehicle merged slowly into traffic, disappearing behind a delivery van for half a second before reappearing farther down Madison Avenue. Ethan stepped toward the street again. "Dispatch, I need units tracking that vehicle now." His radio crackled with overlapping voices almost immediately. Around him the crowd buzzed with nervous energy, phones still raised. People whispering faster now that the situation no longer looked like a simple misunderstanding outside a jewelry store. The woman in the cream-colored dress backed away another step. "I think I should leave," she said quickly. Avery Monroe turned toward her slowly. "No," she said. Quiet. Firm. The woman stopped moving. Something in Avery's tone landed differently this time. Not civilian confidence. Command presence. Ethan noticed it too. The younger officer beside him straightened instinctively, as if responding to authority he could not quite identify. A warm gust swept down the avenue, rattling newspaper stands and carrying the distant smell of roasted nuts from a street cart nearby. Avery adjusted the cuff of her blazer again, revealing just the faintest glimpse of black leather clipped beneath the fabric before. Covering it once more. Ethan caught it this time. Badge holder. Professional issue. His heartbeat kicked harder against his ribs. Who exactly are you? He asked carefully. Avery looked at him for a long moment before answering. Someone who was hoping today would stay quiet. The woman suddenly turned toward the crowd. This is insane. You are all acting like I did something wrong. You falsely accused someone in public, the store manager said nervously. That tends to concern people. Sweat glistened along the woman's hairline despite the breeze. Her composure was collapsing piece by piece beneath the bright daylight. Avery noticed every detail. The shifting feet, the shallow breathing, the constant glances toward the avenue where the SUV had disappeared. You were supposed to keep attention here, Avery said softly. Ethan looked sharply toward her. Supposed to? Avery's eyes never left the woman. You did not expect the footage to clear me that quickly. The woman laughed again, but now it sounded brittle and desperate. You sound crazy. Avery tilted her head slightly. Maybe, but your driver leaving early suggests otherwise. Ethan felt the sidewalk suddenly become too small around him. Too many moving pieces. Too many things no longer making sense. He glanced toward the younger officer. Get another unit here. The officer nodded immediately and stepped aside to radio for backup. Avery finally bent down and picked up her shopping bag from the pavement. The movement was calm, controlled, like someone finishing an inconvenience rather than surviving a public accusation. Ethan watched her carefully now, replaying every moment from the last 30 minutes in his head. Her posture, her observations, the way she tracked exits, vehicles, cameras, people. None of it fit the picture he had built the instant he first saw her standing outside the store. That realization sat heavy in his chest. A Blacktown car pulled to the curb across the street. Two men in business attire stepped out quickly, scanning the block with sharp, coordinated movements before locking eyes on Avery. Ethan noticed how subtly they positioned themselves. One near the crosswalk, one near the corner. Protective angles. Professional. Avery saw them too, but gave no visible reaction. The woman in the cream dress noticed them a second later and went pale. I need my lawyer, she muttered. Avery folded her arms lightly. Now you are thinking ahead. Ethan looked between them. Somebody tell me what is going on. For the first time since the encounter began, Avery seemed almost tired. Not physically, emotionally, like she had spent years watching the same scene repeat itself with different faces. Officer Blake, she said quietly, how long did it take you to decide I belonged in handcuffs? The question hit him harder than he expected. Ethan opened his mouth immediately, ready with a defensive answer, but nothing came out. Because the truth had arrived before the excuse did. Too fast. The little boy near the crowd barrier still stood silently beside his mother watching everything. Ethan noticed now that the child's eyes kept drifting toward Avery with something close to admiration. Not because she was winning, because she never panicked. Avery followed Ethan's gaze toward the boy. Her expression softened briefly again. Then her attention shifted instantly back toward the avenue. Focus sharp again. Your backup units are 3 minutes out, she said. Ethan frowned. How do you know that? Because your dispatcher repeated the timing twice over an open channel. Ethan blinked. He had not even noticed. Avery stepped closer to him then, lowering her voice enough that only he could hear over the traffic noise. Listen carefully. The woman is not the center of this. Ethan stared at her. Then what is? Before she could answer, one of the suited men across the street touched his earpiece sharply. His posture changed instantly. Alert. Urgent. Avery saw it at the same moment he did. The Blacktown car doors swung open again. Ethan's radio exploded with static. Unit 12, be advised. Federal Task Force requesting immediate scene control. Repeat, immediate scene control. Ethan's stomach dropped. The crowd heard it too. Whispers rippled outward across the sidewalk. Federal Task Force. The woman in the cream dress closed her eyes briefly, like someone realizing. The floor beneath them had finally given way. Avery exhaled slowly and looked up at the skyscrapers towering above the avenue, sunlight reflecting across the glass like cold fire. Then she reached inside her blazer at last. Ethan's muscles tightened instinctively until she pulled out not a weapon, but a black leather credential wallet edged in gold. She held it at her side without opening it yet. Officer Blake, she said calmly, you are about 30 seconds away from understanding how badly this day could have gone. The black leather credential wallet rested quietly in Avery Monroe's hand while the entire sidewalk seemed to hold its breath. Traffic still rolled through Madison Avenue. Horns still echoed between glass towers. Somewhere a construction drill screamed against concrete for 3 sharp seconds before stopping again. But around Officer Ethan Blake, time felt strangely suspended beneath the hard white afternoon light. Avery looked at him steadily. "You should probably step back now," she said softly. Ethan stared at the wallet without moving. His pulse hammered against the inside of his collar. The younger officer returned to his side, slightly out of breath. "Additional units are 2 blocks out," he said, then noticed the credential wallet and stopped talking immediately. Across the street, the 2 suited men had already begun moving toward them with calm, purposeful strides. They were not rushing. That was what unsettled Ethan the most. People who panicked rushed. Professionals did not. The woman in the cream-colored dress looked trapped now, her eyes darting between Avery, the approaching men, and the crowd recording everything around her. Sweat glimmered beneath her sunglasses. "This is harassment," she muttered weakly. Avery finally opened the wallet. Gold flashed beneath the sunlight. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The letters seemed to hit the entire block at once. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. The younger officer actually took half a step backward. Even the crowd reacted physically, people lowering phones slightly as the meaning settled over them. Avery held the credentials calmly beside her hip, not dramatic, not triumphant. "Just factual. Special Agent Avery Monroe," she said quietly. "Financial Crimes and Interstate Fraud Task Force." Ethan's mouth went dry. Every moment from the last 40 minutes replayed inside his head with brutal clarity. "Hands where I can see them. Open the bag. Consent to a search. Public sidewalk. Crowds watching. Cameras recording." And all that time she had known exactly who she was while he had reduced her to a suspect before he knew anything at all. The suited men reached them at last. One handed Avery a small earpiece while the other scanned the street carefully without ever fully turning his back to the crowd. "We lost visual on the SUV near Lexington," he said in a low voice. Avery nodded once. "Expected." Ethan blinked. "Expected." Avery slipped the earpiece in place smoothly. "The distraction failed once the footage cleared me." The woman suddenly snapped. "I want an attorney right now." One of the federal agents looked at her calmly. "You will have that opportunity." His voice stayed polite, almost gentle, which somehow made the moment feel even colder. Ethan rubbed a hand slowly across his jaw, trying to steady himself. Nobody told local police there was an operation active in this area. Avery looked at him quietly for a moment before answering. Because local information channels were compromised. The sentence landed heavily. Ethan stared at her. "You thought cops were involved." "I thought someone with access was leaking movement schedules," Avery replied carefully. "We were still narrowing it down." The younger officer beside Ethan went pale. The crowd no longer sounded curious now. The energy had changed into something lower, heavier. People sensed they were standing near something far beyond a jewelry store misunderstanding. The little boy near the barricade still watched Avery with wide eyes while his mother slowly pulled him closer protectively. Avery noticed him again. Ethan noticed that she noticed. Even now, in the middle of a federal operation unraveling in public, she remained aware of everyone around her. That realization unsettled him more than the badge itself. A second wave of police vehicles arrived at the intersection, lights flashing silently beneath the afternoon sun. Officers stepped out quickly before slowing once they recognized federal personnel already controlling the scene. Captain Raymond Cole emerged from the lead vehicle adjusting his tie with irritation already written across his face. "What in the world is happening out here?" he demanded while approaching. Then he saw Avery's credentials. His expression changed instantly. Not shock. Recognition. Avery watched him carefully. "Captain Cole." Raymond stopped cold for half a second before recovering. "Agent Monroe." Ethan looked between them, confused. "You know each other?" Raymond ignored the question. Sweat glimmered near his temples despite the breeze funneling between buildings. "Why was I not informed Federal was operating inside my district?" Avery's expression remained unreadable. Need-to-know basis. Raymond's jaw tightened. "That is not an answer." "Actually," Avery replied softly, "it is exactly the answer." Silence spread again. Thick. Dangerous. Ethan suddenly realized nobody here was speaking casually anymore. Every sentence sounded measured now, like each word carried weight beyond the sidewalk. The woman in the cream-colored dress looked ready to collapse under the pressure of it all. One of the federal agents gently guided her toward an unmarked sedan parked farther down the block. She did not resist. She barely seemed able to think. Ethan watched Avery carefully while sunlight reflected across nearby windows in long, blinding streaks. She looked almost exactly the same as she had at the beginning. Calm posture, steady breathing, controlled voice. But now that he knew who she was, every detail looked different. The observation skills, the emotional restraint, the awareness of exits, vehicles, body language. None of it had been coincidence. Avery turned toward him at last. "Officer Blake." Ethan swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." The word slipped out automatically. Avery noticed it, but did not react. "You did what you thought was right with the information you had." Ethan looked away briefly toward the pavement. "That is not really helping right now." Avery studied him quietly. "It is supposed to help later." Ethan finally met her eyes again. For the first time all afternoon, he saw exhaustion there beneath the professionalism. Not physical exhaustion. Something older. The kind built from years of being judged before being understood. A helicopter thudded faintly somewhere above the skyline. Federal radios crackled softly. Traffic crawled past the flashing patrol cars. And standing in the middle of all of it, Ethan realized the worst part was not that he had accused the wrong person. It was that the moment he saw a calm black woman outside an expensive store, suspicion had arrived faster than humanity. The flashing lights painted faint red and blue reflections across the jewelry store windows, even beneath the bright afternoon sun. Madison Avenue had slowed to a crawl now. Drivers craned their necks through open windows. Pedestrians gathered behind temporary barriers while uniformed officers redirected foot traffic around the growing cluster of patrol cars and unmarked federal vehicles. The entire block felt tense, overheated, suspended between embarrassment and revelation. Avery Monroe stood near the curb beside the Blacktown car, while federal agents moved around her with quiet efficiency. No raised voices. No dramatic orders. Just clipped communication through earpieces and brief eye contact that seemed to carry entire conversations without words. Officer Ethan Blake watched it all from a few feet away, feeling more out of place with every passing second. Captain Raymond Cole stepped closer to Avery, lowering his voice. "You should have warned us before this turned into a public circus." Avery glanced toward the crowd, where dozens of phones were still recording. "The circus started before I arrived." Raymond's jaw tightened. Ethan noticed the way Avery spoke to senior officers without hesitation, without performance. Calm authority. Earned authority. That realization still had not fully settled in his mind. One of the federal agents approached quickly holding a tablet. "Vehicle abandoned 3 blocks east," he reported. "Driver disappeared into the subway entrance." Avery nodded once. "Any visual confirmation?" "Negative." She exhaled slowly through her nose. Disappointment flickering across her face for the first time all afternoon. Tiny. Human. Then it vanished again beneath control. Ethan found himself studying her differently now. Earlier, he had seen arrogance in her calmness. Now he saw discipline. The kind built carefully over years. A television news van rolled onto the avenue, satellite dish rising slowly from the roof. Raymond cursed under his breath. "Perfect." The younger officer beside Ethan shifted nervously. "This is going to be everywhere tonight." Ethan barely heard him. His attention stayed fixed on Avery as she scanned the street again. Every movement still deliberate. Every glance purposeful. Like she was always processing 3 layers deeper than everyone around her. The little boy from earlier remained near the barricade with his mother. Avery noticed him once more, and this time she walked over slowly, federal credentials still clipped at her waist. The crowd parted instinctively for her now. Not because she demanded space. Because the energy around her had changed completely. The boy stared up at her wide-eyed. "Are you really FBI?" he asked quietly. Avery crouched slightly, so she was closer to his eye level. "Yes." "Did they think you stole something because you are black?" The question hit the entire sidewalk like sudden silence. Ethan felt his chest tighten instantly. Nearby conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even Raymond Cole looked away toward traffic. Avery studied the boy gently for a moment before answering. Sometimes people see fear before they see facts. The boy frowned slightly. "That is not fair." Avery gave the smallest smile. "No, it is not." His mother looked embarrassed. I am sorry. He asks whatever he thinks. He should, Avery replied softly. Then she stood again, smoothing the sleeve of her blazer beneath the afternoon breeze. Ethan felt shame crawl slowly through him in a way anger never could. Because hearing the question spoken aloud by a child stripped away every excuse adults usually hid behind. Procedure, suspicion, instinct, training. None of it sounded clean anymore. One of the federal agents approached Avery again. We recovered partial communication logs from the Shell Company vehicle. Avery took the tablet and scanned it quickly. Ethan noticed how her eyes moved. Fast, precise. She barely seemed to blink while processing information. There, she murmured, tapping the screen once. Timestamp matches the distraction call. Raymond leaned closer. You are certain? Avery nodded. The false theft report came in 90 seconds before the SUV entered the avenue. Ethan frowned. So this was all planned. Avery looked at him directly. Someone needed local attention focused here while financial records moved through another location nearby. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck slowly. And I walked straight into it. Avery held his gaze for a moment. You were supposed to. The honesty stung more than blame would have. Ethan looked away toward the patrol cars baking beneath the sunlight. Heat shimmered above the hoods. Radios crackled constantly now. News reporters gathered farther down the sidewalk like vultures circling fresh confusion. Raymond crossed his arms tightly. We still have a leak somewhere. Avery nodded once. Yes. Do you know where? Avery did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the federal agents securing the woman from the jewelry store incident inside the unmarked sedan. I know whoever planned this understood police response times too well. Raymond's face hardened slightly. Ethan caught it. Tiny. Almost invisible. But Avery caught it too. He could tell by the way her eyes narrowed just a fraction before smoothing again. Another layer beneath the conversation. Another current moving underneath words nobody else fully understood yet. A helicopter shadow passed briefly across the avenue before drifting away between skyscrapers. Avery slipped the tablet back to the agent and stepped toward Ethan slowly. Officer Blake. Yes, ma'am. She studied him quietly. When you first approached me, what made you certain enough to treat me like a suspect before evidence existed? Ethan opened his mouth automatically, ready with procedure again, but stopped himself. Because for the first time all day, he was forcing himself to answer honestly instead of professionally. The call sounded urgent, he said. Weakly. Avery waited. Ethan swallowed hard. And he looked toward the pavement briefly. You look like someone who did not belong outside that store. The words sounded ugly the second they left his mouth. Avery nodded once like she had expected nothing else. No anger. No triumph. Somehow that hurt more. Thank you for telling the truth, she said quietly. Then she turned toward the avenue where federal vehicles continued arriving beneath the endless glare of the Manhattan sun, while Ethan stood motionless beside the patrol car, realizing honesty could expose a person more completely than accusation ever could. The afternoon light had started turning harsher against the glass towers above Madison Avenue, reflecting sharp white streaks across police windshields and federal sedans parked bumper to bumper along the curb. Reporters clustered behind barricades now, microphones raised, camera lenses glinting beneath the sun while officers pushed the crowd farther back from the scene. The city had fully noticed. Avery Monroe stood near the rear door of the black town car reviewing information on a federal tablet while agents moved around her in quiet coordination. Her expression remained controlled, but Ethan Blake could see the fatigue beneath it now that he knew how to look. The emotional exhaustion of someone constantly forced to prove she belonged in rooms where nobody questioned anyone else. A paramedic handed bottled water to several officers nearby. Ethan accepted one automatically, but never opened it. His stomach still felt tight. The woman from the jewelry store sat inside an unmarked sedan a few yards away, staring blankly through the tinted window while federal agents quietly documented evidence beside the vehicle. Captain Raymond Cole paced near the barricades, speaking sharply into his phone. No comment until Internal Affairs arrives, he snapped before hanging up abruptly. Internal Affairs. The words settled heavily in Ethan's mind. Avery looked up from the tablet then. We traced one of the Shell accounts. Raymond turned immediately. Where? Midtown Transfer Hub. 3 million moved 20 minutes ago. Ethan frowned. During the distraction? Avery nodded once. Exactly during the distraction. The younger officer beside Ethan muttered under his breath. All this over financial transfers. Avery heard him anyway. Not just transfers. She stepped closer, lowering the tablet slightly. The accounts connect to offshore laundering operations tied to city contracts. Raymond's expression darkened immediately. You are saying public money? Avery held his gaze. I am saying someone very powerful needed police attention focused somewhere else for exactly 10 minutes. Silence followed. Not confusion this time. Understanding. The weight of it pressed over the sidewalk harder than the heat. Ethan looked around at the patrol cars, the officers, the reporters gathering like storm clouds at the edge of the avenue. Earlier the scene had felt embarrassing. Now it felt dangerous. One of the federal agents approached quickly. Agent Monroe, we pulled surveillance from the subway entrance. Avery took the tablet. Ethan watched her eyes move rapidly across the footage. Pause there, she said quietly. The image froze on a grainy frame of the SUV driver entering the station. Raymond stepped closer. Can you identify him? Avery zoomed slowly. The image sharpened just enough to reveal a silver police retirement ring on the driver's hand. Ethan felt the air shift instantly around Captain Cole. Tiny, almost invisible. But Avery noticed it too. Ethan could tell. Former law enforcement, Raymond said too quickly. Avery did not answer immediately. She kept studying the frozen frame while sunlight reflected across the screen. Maybe, she said softly. Ethan suddenly realized nobody trusted anyone completely anymore. Not local police. Not federal agents. Not even the captain standing in front of them. The atmosphere had changed into something colder than tension. Suspicion with uniforms attached to it. A television reporter began speaking into a camera farther down the block. Sources now confirm federal investigators are connected to the incident that shut down portions of Madison Avenue this afternoon. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. This would follow everyone involved for weeks. Months maybe. Avery handed the tablet back. To the agent. Keep digging through transit footage. I want movement patterns from the last 48 hours. Yes, ma'am. Ethan watched the federal agents respond to her instantly, professionally, without ego. Respect built from competence. The realization stung again. Earlier that day, he had treated her like a criminal because she stood outside a luxury store while black. Now half the city's financial crimes division answered to her. A breeze swept through the avenue carrying scraps of newspaper and the distant smell of rain, even though the sky remained clear above Manhattan. Avery finally uncapped a water bottle and took a slow sip. Ethan noticed her hands for the first time since the confrontation began. Calm, but not relaxed. Tiny tension still lived in her fingers like someone accustomed to never fully lowering their guard. How long have you been undercover? Ethan asked quietly. Avery glanced toward him. Long enough to know public scenes rarely happen by accident. Ethan nodded slowly. And long enough to know people make assumptions fast. Avery held his gaze for a second. Faster than facts. The honesty in her voice carried no bitterness now. That somehow made it heavier. Raymond approached them again, lowering his voice. Internal Affairs is requesting statements from everyone involved. Ethan's stomach tightened instantly. Avery looked almost unsurprised. Expected. Raymond rubbed a hand across his forehead. This is going to become political very quickly. Avery's eyes drifted toward the reporters beyond the barricades. It already is. A sudden burst of shouting rose near the edge of the crowd. Officers shifted immediately toward the noise before realizing it was only news crews competing for position. Still, the sound snapped tension through the entire scene like static electricity. Ethan looked toward Avery instinctively. She had not flinched, not even slightly. Her eyes simply scanned the movement automatically, assessing exits, threats, patterns. Ethan realized then that calmness was not her personality. It was survival. One of the federal agents approached carrying a thin manila folder. We recovered financial records from the abandoned vehicle. Avery opened the folder quickly. Her expression changed almost invisibly after reading the first page. Ethan caught it immediately now that he knew her tells. What is it? He asked. Avery looked up slowly. The transfer account was accessed using a city clearance code. Raymond stiffened beside them. Whose clearance? Avery closed the folder gently beneath the bright afternoon sun. For a long moment, she said nothing while traffic crawled behind them and helicopters thudded faintly above the skyline. Then she finally answered in a voice so calm it made Ethan's pulse jump instantly. Captain Cole, she said quietly. I think someone inside your department knew this distraction was coming before it happened. The noise of Madison Avenue seemed farther away now, muffled beneath the pressure settling over the sidewalk. Captain Raymond Cole stood perfectly still beside the patrol cars while sunlight burned against the side of his face, highlighting the faint sheen of sweat gathering near his temples. Around him, officers pretended not to listen while listening to everything. Federal agents moved more carefully now, too, conversations dropping lower, glances lasting longer. Nobody trusted the atmosphere anymore. Avery Monroe held the manila folder against her side calmly, her dark blazer stirring lightly in the wind funneling between skyscrapers. That is a serious accusation, Raymond said finally. His voice remained controlled, but Ethan Blake noticed the strain underneath it. Avery nodded once, which is why I did not make one. Raymond frowned. Then what exactly are you saying? Avery looked directly at him. I am saying the access code belongs to your department. The distinction hung in the air sharply enough to cut through the noise of reporters shouting questions beyond the barricades. Ethan watched Raymond carefully now. Earlier, he never would have questioned the captain's reactions. Now, every pause felt loaded with meaning. Every glance carried weight. One of the federal agents approached quietly holding another tablet. Agent Monroe, Cyber Division, confirmed the transfer originated from a secure municipal terminal. Avery took the tablet. Location: Downtown Records Division. Raymond crossed his arms tightly. Hundreds of employees have access there. Avery's eyes remained steady. Not hundreds with command-level override clearance. Ethan felt his stomach tighten again. A city bus groaned past the intersection, brakes squealing against hot pavement while tourists pressed their faces against the windows trying to glimpse the commotion outside. News helicopters circled somewhere above the skyline now, low enough that the rhythmic thudding drifted between the buildings like distant drums. Avery studied the tablet another moment before handing it back. Someone knew our task force was tracking the shell accounts, she said quietly. They also knew local police response patterns well enough to engineer a distraction precise to the minute. Raymond shook his head immediately. You still do not know if anyone inside my department intentionally helped them? No, Avery agreed softly. I do not. Ethan noticed something strange then. Avery never overreached, never dramatized. She only spoke in facts and careful observations, which somehow made every sentence feel more dangerous. The younger officer stepped closer to Ethan and whispered nervously, "Do you think somebody here is actually involved?" Ethan did not answer because he no longer knew who deserved certainty anymore. A gust of wind scattered loose paper cups along the curb. Avery glanced instinctively toward the avenue again. Ethan noticed how she never stopped monitoring movement even while talking. Every passing vehicle, every shifting crowd pocket, every officer changing position. Her awareness remained constant like breathing. Agent Monroe. Raymond's voice lowered. If you are implying corruption inside my precinct, I need to know now. Avery looked at him quietly for several seconds before answering. I think somebody exploited assumptions they knew officers would make without evidence. Ethan felt the words hit him immediately. Because underneath the investigation, underneath the money laundering and shell companies and federal task forces, another truth sat exposed in broad daylight. The entire operation had worked because nobody questioned the idea of a black woman outside a luxury jewelry store becoming an instant suspect. Avery continued calmly. The false theft report was designed to trigger urgency, emotion, and public pressure. She looked toward the crowd where reporters still aimed cameras toward the scene. People stop thinking clearly when they believe they are already watching a crime happen. Raymond exhaled slowly, and Officer Blake walked into the middle of it. Ethan swallowed hard, but said nothing. Avery glanced toward him briefly. So did everyone else. The words were not cruel. Somehow that made them worse. A federal radio crackled sharply nearby. Transit surveillance located the SUV driver exiting at Grand Central. Avery's posture changed instantly. Focus sharper. Any facial match? Partial only. The agent handed her another image. Ethan stepped closer unintentionally while Avery studied the grainy photo. A middle-aged man wearing a baseball cap and dark sunglasses moved through the station crowd with his head lowered. But one detail stood out clearly. A police memorial wristband wrapped around his hand. Raymond noticed it too. That could belong to anyone, he said quickly. Avery remained calm. Yes. Another pause. But it probably does not. Ethan looked between them again. Raymond's defensiveness had become impossible to ignore now. Not guilt exactly. Fear. Institutional fear. The fear of realizing something rotten might exist closer than anyone wanted to admit. Reporters suddenly surged louder beyond the barricades. Captain Cole, did federal agents uncover corruption inside the department? Officer Blake, is it true the woman detained was actually FBI? Flashbulbs exploded against the afternoon light. Officers pushed the media back again while more cameras arrived at the scene. Ethan felt heat rise into his face. Hours earlier, he had stood confidently in front of those same cameras, believing he controlled the situation. Now every lens felt like judgment. Avery slipped her credentials back inside her blazer and stepped toward the barricade briefly. The reporters immediately erupted with questions over one another. She ignored all of them. Instead, her attention settled on the little boy still standing quietly beside his mother near the back of the crowd. He looked overwhelmed now by the noise and flashing lights. Avery walked over calmly and crouched beside him again. "You okay?" she asked softly. The boy nodded uncertainly. "Are they mad at you?" Avery glanced briefly toward the patrol cars and reporters before answering. Some people get uncomfortable when the truth arrives publicly. The boy frowned thoughtfully. Did the officer say sorry yet? Ethan felt the question hit his chest like cold water from 20 feet away. Avery looked toward him across the crowded sidewalk. Their eyes met briefly beneath the flashing lights and harsh afternoon sun. Then she turned back to the boy and answered in the gentlest voice Ethan had heard from her all day. Sometimes people need a little time before they know how. The question lingered over the sidewalk long after the little boy stopped speaking. Did the officer say sorry yet? The noise of Manhattan returned slowly around it, like water filling empty space. Car horns echoed between buildings. Helicopter blades pulsed overhead. Reporters shouted over one another behind metal barricades while camera crews adjusted tripods beneath the hard afternoon sun. But for Officer Ethan Blake, everything narrowed into the silence between himself and Avery Monroe standing 20 feet away near the crowd. Avery rose slowly from beside the boy, smoothing her blazer sleeve again with calm, deliberate movements. The child's mother thanked her quietly before guiding him farther back from the reporters. Ethan watched Avery carefully as she walked toward the federal vehicles again. She did not look victorious. She looked tired. That realization settled heavily inside him. Most people imagine power looked loud, aggressive, but Avery carried authority like something heavy she had been forced to lift for years. Captain Raymond Cole approached Ethan near the patrol cars. "Internal Affairs wants immediate preliminary statements," he muttered under his breath. Ethan rubbed his jaw slowly. "You think somebody inside the department leaked federal movement?" Raymond glanced toward Avery before answering. "I think today became a nightmare very quickly." Not an answer. Ethan noticed that now. Around them, officers moved carefully, conversations shorter than usual. Trust had become uncertain currency on the sidewalk. One of the federal agents approached Avery with another update. Cyber Division matched the transfer account to 6 previous municipal contracts. Avery nodded once. "Construction?" "Mostly." Ethan noticed the subtle shift in Raymond's posture again. Barely visible tension in his shoulders. Avery noticed too. She always noticed. "Those contracts passed through oversight committees," Raymond said carefully. Avery looked at him calmly. "Exactly." The air between them tightened. Ethan suddenly realized he was witnessing something larger than corruption. This was systems protecting themselves. Money moving through institutions so quietly nobody questioned it until sunlight hit the wrong angle. A television monitor from one of the news crews flashed nearby, showing live footage of the scene. Ethan caught sight of himself on the screen, standing over Avery earlier that afternoon, hand near his belt while she stood calmly beside the jewelry store entrance. Seeing it from outside himself made his stomach twist painfully. He looked exactly like what people feared. The younger officer beside him saw the footage too and looked away awkwardly. Avery noticed the monitor as she passed. Her eyes lingered on the image for only a second before moving on. No anger, no smugness. Somehow that made Ethan feel worse. He stepped forward before he could talk himself out of it. "Agent Monroe." Avery stopped walking. Sunlight flashed across the federal credentials clipped inside her blazer. "Yes." Ethan swallowed once. Around them, reporters continued shouting questions while officers redirected traffic farther down the avenue. The city kept moving even while his chest felt strangely frozen. I owe you an apology. Avery studied him quietly without rescuing him from the moment. Ethan forced himself to continue. When I saw you outside that store, I made assumptions before evidence existed. And I told myself it was procedure because that sounded better than the truth. The words felt rough leaving his mouth. Honest. Uncomfortable. Necessary. Nearby conversations softened slightly as people sensed something important happening beneath the noise. Avery remained still for several seconds before answering. Most people never say it out loud. Ethan gave a weak, humorless laugh. That probably does not make it better. No, Avery agreed softly. But it makes it real. A warm breeze swept down the avenue, lifting loose strands of hair around her face while sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Ethan looked down briefly at the pavement. That little kid asked if I apologized because he already knew what this looked like. Avery's expression softened almost invisibly. Children notice patterns faster than adults. Ethan nodded slowly. And adults spend more time pretending patterns are accidents. Avery looked at him carefully then, like she was deciding whether honesty deserved honesty in return. Do you know what the hardest part is? She asked quietly. Ethan shook his head. It is not the accusation. She glanced toward the jewelry store where employees still stood nervously near the entrance. It is watching people become relieved only after discovering your job title. Ethan felt the words hit deep enough to ache. Because she was right. The crowd respected her now because she was FBI. Because she carried credentials. Because power had entered the story. Earlier, none of that protection existed. She had just been a black woman outside a luxury store. Raymond approached again, holding his phone tightly. Federal command wants everyone downtown within the hour. Avery nodded once. Understood. Raymond hesitated before adding. They are opening a joint corruption review. Ethan noticed the flicker in Avery's eyes. Not surprise. Confirmation. Then they found enough, she said quietly. Raymond looked away toward the flashing patrol cars. Looks like it. Reporters surged louder again as words spread through the crowd. Corruption review. Federal investigation. Police leak. The story was growing bigger by the minute. Avery clipped her credentials securely back inside her blazer. Officer Blake. Ethan straightened instinctively. Yes, ma'am. Avery glanced briefly toward the little boy still watching from behind the barricade. What happens after today depends on whether this becomes embarrassment or reflection. Ethan frowned slightly. Meaning? Avery met his eyes steadily beneath the blazing Manhattan sunlight. One changes headlines. The other changes people. Then her federal radio crackled sharply against her side. Avery listened for 2 seconds before her entire expression sharpened again. Focus returned instantly. They found another transfer location, she said quietly. And this time it is inside police headquarters. The words landed harder than the sirens echoing through Madison Avenue. Inside police headquarters. Officer Ethan Blake stared at Avery Monroe while the city noise seemed to dull around him again. Reporters still shouted behind barricades. Camera crews still jockeyed for position beneath the afternoon sun. Federal radios still crackled nonstop beside rows of flashing patrol cars. But all Ethan could hear was the implication buried beneath Avery's calm voice. Whatever this investigation truly was, it had spread far deeper than a false accusation outside a jewelry store. Avery turned immediately toward the Blacktown car as another federal agent approached at a near jog. Cyber Division confirmed the transfer terminal, he said quietly. Third floor records processing. Access logged under temporary authorization. Captain Raymond Cole stepped closer. Temporary authorization from who? The agent hesitated briefly before answering. The override originated from a captain-level credentials chain. Silence. Heavy, dangerous silence. Ethan looked toward Raymond instinctively. The captain's face remained controlled, but the tightness around his eyes had sharpened noticeably now. Avery noticed it too. She noticed everything. That does not prove the credentials owner initiated the transfer, Raymond said carefully. Avery nodded once. Correct. Another pause. But it proves someone inside the system had access. The federal agent handed Avery a second tablet. Ethan watched her study it while sunlight reflected sharply across the screen. Her eyes moved quickly through. Timestamps, security logs, transit records. The focus in her face had changed completely now. Earlier, she had balanced investigation with emotional restraint. Now only the investigator remained. The transfer happened exactly 4 minutes after the theft call came through, she murmured. Ethan rubbed his forehead slowly. So while every patrol unit nearby focused on you, $3 million moved through municipal channels unnoticed, Avery finished quietly. A news helicopter swept lower overhead, its shadow sliding across the avenue and briefly darkening the line of police vehicles. Officers nearby looked tense now. Conversations clipped short whenever federal agents passed close enough to overhear. Distrust had infected the scene completely. Raymond adjusted his tie again. Ethan noticed the movement this time. Nervous habit. Federal command wants us downtown immediately, Raymond said. Avery handed the tablet back to the agent. Then we move. She started toward the town car before stopping suddenly. Her eyes narrowed toward the jewelry store entrance. Ethan followed her gaze. A man in a dark gray suit stood partially hidden near the revolving doors, speaking quietly into his phone. The second he noticed federal attention shift toward him, he turned away too quickly. Avery's expression sharpened instantly. Hold that position, she said into her radio. 2 federal agents moved immediately through the crowd toward the man. He disappeared back inside the store before they reached him. Ethan stepped forward instinctively. Should we secure the building? Avery shook her head once. Too visible. If he is connected, he will already have an exit route. The calm certainty in her voice unsettled Ethan all over again. She did not sound suspicious. She sounded experienced. The younger officer approached nervously. Ma'am, reporters are saying social media already picked up the footage from earlier. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. He already knew which footage. Him confronting Avery outside the store while cameras rolled. Avery remained calm. That was inevitable. The younger officer swallowed awkwardly. People online are calling it racial profiling. Ethan felt. The words land publicly this time. Permanent. Recorded. Searchable. Avery looked toward him carefully, but said nothing. No lecture. No satisfaction. Just quiet acknowledgement of reality. Somehow that restraint carried more weight than anger ever could. A sudden commotion erupted near the barricades as another news crew pushed forward shouting questions. Agent Monroe, did local police compromise the investigation? Captain Cole, are federal agents investigating corruption inside the department? Officers struggled to keep the crowd back while camera flashes exploded across the avenue like bursts of white heat. Ethan felt sweat gathering beneath his collar despite the breeze. Avery stepped toward the barricades calmly. Reporters surged instantly. She stopped just short of them, sunlight catching along the edge of her credentials inside the blazer pocket. No public statement at this time, she said evenly. Then can you confirm local officers wrongly detained a federal agent? One reporter shouted. Avery's eyes flicked briefly toward Ethan standing beside the patrol car. I can confirm assumptions create consequences faster than facts. The reporters exploded with follow-up questions immediately, but Avery turned away before answering another one. Ethan stood frozen, because she could have humiliated him publicly right there. The cameras were already waiting for it. The internet would have rewarded it. Instead, she protected his dignity more carefully than he had protected hers. That realization settled painfully into his chest. Raymond approached Avery again, lowering his voice. Internal Affairs wants my statement before we leave the scene. Avery looked at him steadily. You should give it. Raymond's jaw tightened. You think I am involved? I think pressure reveals people. Avery replied softly. Today is revealing a lot. Another federal radio crackled sharply. Agent Monroe, additional transfer activity detected. Avery grabbed the radio instantly. Location: police headquarters parking structure. Vehicle leaving now under municipal access clearance. Avery's expression hardened immediately. Description: black sedan. Government plates. Ethan saw it. The same second Avery did. Raymond Cole had gone completely still. Too still. The kind of stillness people fall into when their thoughts start racing faster than their bodies can hide. Avery looked directly at him beneath the flashing lights and endless glare of the Manhattan afternoon. Captain, she said quietly, where exactly is your department-issued sedan right now? For the first time all afternoon, Captain Raymond Cole did not answer immediately. The silence itself felt louder than the helicopters circling above Manhattan. Flashing patrol lights reflected across his face in restless waves of red and blue, while reporters behind the barricades continued shouting questions nobody important was answering anymore. Officer Ethan Blake watched Raymond carefully, every instinct inside him suddenly alert in a completely different way than before. Earlier that day, he had looked at Avery Monroe and seen suspicion. Now he looked at his own captain and saw uncertainty. Avery stood perfectly still beside the Blacktown car, one hand resting lightly near the federal radio clipped inside her blazer. "Captain," she repeated calmly, "where is your department-issued sedan?" Raymond exhaled slowly through his nose. "Parked downtown." Avery's expression never changed. "The vehicle leaving headquarters used your access clearance." "That does not mean I was driving it." "No," Avery agreed softly. "It does not." Another heavy silence settled over the avenue. Ethan noticed nearby officers trying not to stare while absolutely staring. The atmosphere had become fragile now, like one wrong sentence could crack the entire department open in public. Raymond rubbed a hand across the back of his neck. "I loaned the vehicle to Deputy Commissioner Harris this morning for a budget meeting." Avery's eyes narrowed slightly. "And you did not think to mention that earlier?" Raymond's jaw tightened. "You were busy implying corruption in my precinct." "I was busy following evidence." The words came calm, precise, not emotional. Ethan realized again how dangerous Avery's restraint actually was. She never raised her voice because she never needed to. One of the federal agents stepped forward, quickly holding another tablet. "Agent Monroe, traffic cameras picked up the sedan entering the lower tunnel 10 minutes ago." Avery took the device immediately. "Any visual on the driver?" "Partial only." She enlarged the grainy image beneath the harsh afternoon sunlight. Ethan moved closer instinctively. The windshield glare obscured most facial details, but one thing stood out clearly. The driver wore a white dress shirt and police command insignia on the shoulder. Raymond saw it too. Half the command staff wears those insignias. Avery nodded once. "Exactly why somebody chose them." Ethan frowned. "You think this is a setup?" Avery finally looked toward him fully. "I think somebody very intelligent understands institutional fear." She gestured lightly toward the patrol cars, the reporters, the barricades swallowing half the block. "The second corruption touches a police department, trust collapses faster than facts." Ethan felt that sentence settle heavily into his chest because he could already see it happening around them. Officers watching one another differently. Federal agents speaking in tighter circles. News crews smelling blood in the water. The woman from the jewelry store had almost disappeared from the story entirely now, reduced to a detail inside something much larger. Yet none of this would have started without that first assumption outside the store. Avery handed the tablet back to the agent. "Lock down all outgoing municipal access routes." "Yes, ma'am." Raymond stepped closer to her, lowering his voice enough that Ethan barely caught the words over the traffic noise. "If this leaks before we know who is involved, the city will tear itself apart publicly." Avery held his gaze steadily. "The city did not create this problem because people learned about it." Raymond looked away first. A sudden burst of shouting rose near the barricades again as reporters received updates through earpieces. Ethan caught fragments drifting across the avenue. Federal corruption probe. Police command review. Financial crimes division. The story was spreading faster than anyone could contain now. Avery's radio crackled sharply. "Agent Monroe, Cyber Division. Confirmed encrypted communication between the jewelry store caller and a municipal server." Ethan blinked. "Wait. The woman who accused you?" Avery nodded once. "She was not random." Raymond frowned deeply. "You think she was recruited specifically for the distraction?" "I think she was selected because she understood what people would believe quickly." The sentence hit Ethan harder than anything else all day. Because underneath the corruption and shell accounts and leaking access codes sat one brutal truth nobody wanted to say directly. The distraction worked because a frightened crowd found the accusation believable the second they saw a black woman standing outside an expensive store. Avery looked toward the jewelry store entrance again, where employees still lingered nervously inside the glass doors. "Bias is efficient," she said quietly. "It saves criminals a lot of time." Ethan lowered his eyes briefly toward the pavement. The shame inside him no longer felt defensive now, just honest. Nearby, the little boy from earlier still stood beside the barricade, watching everything unfold with solemn eyes far older than his age. Avery noticed him again. She always noticed him. The child waved shyly this time. Avery gave a small nod in return. No performance. No smile for cameras. Just acknowledgement. Ethan suddenly understood something then. The reason she remained calm through humiliation was not because she was fearless. It was because she had lived through versions of this moment long before federal credentials ever protected her. One of the federal agents approached again at a near run. "Agent Monroe, we just got confirmation." Avery turned instantly. "What confirmation?" The agent handed her a printed sheet fresh from the mobile command vehicle. "Deputy Commissioner Harris never attended the budget meeting this morning." Raymond's face drained of color beneath the flashing lights. Ethan felt the air shift around them all at once. Avery read the document carefully, sunlight reflecting across the paper in sharp, white streaks. Then she looked up slowly toward Raymond Cole. Her expression remained calm, but now there was something colder beneath it. Not anger. Certainty. "Captain," she said quietly, "someone used your authority today without your knowledge." She paused briefly while reporters screamed questions beyond the barricades and helicopters thundered overhead. "Which means either your department has been infiltrated," her eyes locked onto his completely, "or someone very close to you wanted me publicly discredited before this investigation reached headquarters." The afternoon sky above Manhattan had begun turning pale gold around the edges of the skyscrapers, but the heat still clung to the avenue like pressure trapped beneath glass. Flashing patrol lights painted restless colors across the storefronts while helicopters circled low enough to shake the air every few minutes. Reporters crowded shoulder to shoulder behind the barricades now, shouting names, theories, accusations. The story had grown beyond control. Yet in the middle of the chaos, Avery Monroe remained almost unervingly calm. Captain Raymond Cole stood motionless beside the patrol car after Avery's last sentence, his face drained of certainty. Ethan Blake watched him carefully, realizing the captain suddenly looked older than he had that morning. Not weak, just exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes when trust begins collapsing beneath your feet in public. One of the federal agents approached Avery quickly. "Agent Monroe, headquarters approved the emergency audit request." Avery nodded once. "Good. Internal Affairs is also requesting immediate access to department communication logs." Raymond closed his eyes briefly. "This is going to destroy morale." Avery looked at him quietly. "No. Corruption destroys morale. Exposure only reveals it." Ethan noticed the captain had stopped arguing with her. Earlier there had been defensiveness in every response. Now there was only resignation mixed with fear. A breeze swept through the avenue carrying the smell of rain and hot asphalt together while camera flashes continued exploding behind the barricades. The little boy from earlier had finally disappeared into the crowd with his mother, but Ethan still remembered the question that child had asked. Did the officer say sorry yet? Somehow that simple sentence still echoed louder than the reporters. A federal SUV rolled slowly toward the curb. Two additional agents stepped out carrying evidence cases and portable monitors. Avery immediately moved toward them, scanning documents under the fading sunlight, while radios crackled nonstop around her. Ethan found himself watching her again, not with suspicion this time, but with uncomfortable respect. She had every reason to humiliate him publicly after what happened outside the jewelry store. Instead, she had protected his dignity while dismantling an entire corruption network around him. That kind of restraint required strength he was not sure he possessed himself. Raymond suddenly spoke quietly beside him. "You know what the worst part is?" Ethan looked over. The captain stared toward the flashing news cameras. "The public will remember the accusation before they remember the truth." Ethan swallowed hard because he knew Raymond was right. Somewhere online, clips of him confronting Avery had already spread through thousands of phones. Most people would never watch long enough to see the federal badge appear later. Avery approached them again carrying a thin folder. "We confirm the municipal server breach originated through a retired command consultant." Raymond frowned deeply. "Retired?" Avery nodded. "Former Deputy Chief Warren Hayes." Ethan recognized the name instantly. Half the department did. Hayes had spent decades managing city contract approvals before retiring 2 years earlier. He still had access credentials? Ethan asked. "Limited archive clearance," Avery replied. "Enough for someone patient." Raymond rubbed his forehead slowly. Hayes trained half the administrative division. Avery held the folder against her side, which means he understood exactly how to exploit institutional blind spots. Ethan looked down briefly toward the pavement. Like public assumptions. Avery's eyes shifted toward him. Exactly like public assumptions. A long silence followed between them while traffic crawled around the blocked avenue and helicopters pulsed overhead. Ethan finally forced himself to ask the question that had been sitting inside him for hours. Why did you stay calm? Avery looked genuinely surprised for the first time all day. What do you mean? Most people would have exploded after being accused like that in front of a crowd. Avery glanced toward the jewelry store entrance where the entire nightmare had started beneath the bright afternoon sunlight. Because anger would not have protected me. The honesty in her voice settled quietly into Ethan's chest. Avery continued softly. People hear confidence differently, depending on who is speaking. Ethan had no answer for that because he understood exactly what she meant now. Raymond exhaled heavily beside them. This city keeps teaching the same lesson in different uniforms. Avery looked toward him. Then maybe people should finally learn it. Another federal radio burst to life. Agent Monroe, transfer activity has stopped. All municipal accounts frozen. Avery nodded slightly. Good work. For the first time all afternoon, some of the tension seemed to loosen around the scene. Officers lowered radios slightly. Federal agents stopped moving quite so urgently. Even the reporters beyond the barricades sounded less frantic now that the immediate crisis had stabilized. The city itself seemed to exhale. Ethan watched Avery tuck the folder beneath her arm while sunlight reflected warmly across the side of her face. Earlier that day, he had seen a suspect. Then he saw a federal agent. But standing here now, he realized the most important thing had nothing to do with her badge at all. The badge only forced people to reconsider the humanity they should have recognized from the beginning. Avery looked toward him again. Officer Blake. Yes, ma'am. She hesitated briefly. You asked why I stayed calm. Ethan nodded once. Avery's expression softened just slightly beneath the fading Manhattan sunlight. Because if I let every false assumption turn me bitter, she said quietly, they would eventually take more than my dignity. The sentence lingered between them while helicopters drifted farther across the skyline, and the flashing patrol lights reflected softly against the jewelry store windows where the entire day had begun. Ethan looked at Avery for a long moment before speaking carefully. You could have ruined my career today. Avery glanced toward the crowd, where cameras still pointed in their direction. Maybe. Ethan frowned slightly. Then why did you not? Avery looked back at him steadily. Because humiliation does not teach people nearly as well as reflection does. By the time the sun began slipping behind the Manhattan skyline, the chaos on Madison Avenue had finally started to thin. News vans remained lined along the curb with satellite dishes raised toward the darkening sky, but the shouting had softened into tired conversations and quiet live reports. Patrol cars still flashed red and blue against the storefront windows, though the lights no longer felt aggressive. Just exhausted. The city itself seemed drained after carrying tension for an entire afternoon. Avery Monroe stood beside the black federal town car reviewing one final document while a cool evening breeze moved through the avenue, carrying the smell of rain and warm pavement together. Around her, federal agents packed equipment into vehicles and exchanged brief, low conversations through earpieces. The operation was ending. Ethan Blake leaned against the hood of his patrol car a few yards away, watching the scene quietly. He had not checked his phone in over an hour. He already knew what waited there anyway. Headlines, video clips, public reactions. But strangely, none of that felt as heavy anymore as the conversation still echoing in his mind. Humiliation does not teach people nearly as well as reflection does. Captain Raymond Cole approached Avery slowly, jacket folded over one arm now. The long day showed across his face. Internal Affairs confirmed Hayes used archived credentials to bypass the municipal filters, he said quietly. Avery nodded once. And the shell accounts? Frozen. Raymond exhaled deeply. Looks like your task force just uncovered 12 years of hidden contract laundering. Avery closed the folder in her hands. Looks like your department still has honest officers worth protecting too. Raymond looked toward Ethan standing near the patrol car. A faint sadness crossed the captain's expression. Some lessons arrive rougher than others. Avery followed his gaze briefly. The important ones usually do. The last few reporters beyond the barricades were already packing cables into cases while evening traffic slowly reclaimed the avenue. Store employees emerged cautiously from nearby buildings, trying to return Manhattan to normal after spending an entire day trapped beside a federal investigation. Yet the jewelry store entrance still carried the memory of where everything began. Ethan finally stepped away from the patrol car and walked toward Avery. The evening lights softened the sharp edges of the city now, turning the glass towers gold and silver above them. Avery noticed him approaching immediately, though she gave no sign of tension. She simply waited calmly beneath the fading sky. Ethan stopped a few feet away. "Agent Monroe." "Officer Blake." He looked down briefly before speaking. "I keep replaying the beginning of today in my head." Avery remained silent. Ethan swallowed once. The worst part is realizing how normal it felt at first. A siren echoed somewhere farther downtown before fading into traffic noise. Avery studied him carefully. Patterns feel normal when people stop questioning them. Ethan nodded slowly. "I think I spent years calling instincts professional when some of them were just assumptions dressed up in procedure." Avery did not rush to comfort him. She simply let the truth exist between them. That honesty felt strangely clean beneath the evening air. Ethan glanced toward the jewelry store windows reflecting the patrol lights. That little boy saw the whole thing. Avery followed his gaze toward the now empty barricades. "Yes." Ethan rubbed his hands together slowly. "I keep thinking about what he learned from today." Avery's expression softened almost invisibly. Maybe he learned something changed before the day ended. Ethan looked at her carefully then. "You still believe people can change after moments like this?" Avery gave the smallest shrug. "I have to." "Why?" She looked up briefly toward the skyline, where the last sunlight stretched across the tops of the buildings. "Because if nobody changes, then all pain becomes permanent." The sentence settled quietly into the space around them while officers packed away barricades nearby. Ethan realized then that Avery carried strength very differently than anyone he had ever admired before. Not loud strength, not dominance, something steadier. The kind that survives humiliation without becoming cruel afterward. One of the federal agents opened the rear door of the town car for Avery. "Ready when you are, ma'am." Avery nodded slightly, but did not move yet. Ethan took a slow breath. "For what it is worth, I am sorry for who I was when I first saw you today." Avery looked at him for a long moment beneath the soft evening glow reflecting off the avenue. Then she answered quietly, "The important part is whether you recognize me differently the next time you see someone else." Ethan felt his throat tighten unexpectedly, because he understood exactly what she meant. This was never only about her. Avery finally turned toward the town car. The federal agents stepped aside respectfully as she approached. Before getting in, she paused once more and looked back toward Madison Avenue. The reporters were gone now. The crowd had disappeared. Only flashing patrol lights remained reflected across the wet-looking pavement beneath the city lights beginning to wake for the night. Earlier that day, the same street had watched a black woman treated like a suspect before anyone bothered seeing her humanity. Now the avenue stood quiet, almost ashamed of itself. Avery slipped into the town car without another word. The door closed softly. Ethan stood motionless beside the patrol car while the federal vehicle pulled away from the curb and disappeared slowly into the evening traffic flowing through Manhattan. Red taillights reflected briefly across the jewelry store windows before vanishing completely. The city noise returned gradually after that. Distant horns, tires against pavement, helicopters fading farther uptown. But Ethan remained standing there beneath the flashing lights long after the federal convoy disappeared, staring at his own reflection in the dark store glass and realizing authority meant nothing if humanity arrived second.